Vincent Porter had built his life on control. Every morning, he followed the same routine, a well-rehearsed march of meetings, strategy sessions, and decisions that shaped the future. In the boardroom, he was a titan, unshakable, emotionless, always ahead. Nothing ever fazed him. Then, one afternoon, as he passed an old street he didn't recognize, something caught his eye. A girl. She stood there, her face partially hidden by her messy hair. But what froze him, what made his heart race, was the mark on her skin. A mark, unmistakably like his own. His hand instinctively brushed his own skin, a shiver running down his spine. Why did this little girl have the same mark? What did this strange coincidence mean? What truth was about to surface? Before we dive into this emotional story, comment below, where in the world are you watching from? Hit the subscribe button and turn on notification. Vincent's day had been full of numbers, figures, and endless decisions, calculated, deliberate. He was used to it. There was no room for distractions, no space for anything unexpected. Everything in his life had been neatly compartmentalized, a perfect arrangement, carefully designed for efficiency. But the moment he saw her, all of that came crashing down. The little girl was standing at the corner, her small frame almost lost in the shadow of the tall buildings around her. She wasn't out of place, no, she was too quiet, too still for this chaotic city. Her unkempt hair blew softly in the breeze, and her eyes, dark and wide, met his. She was staring right at him, her gaze intense, unwavering. It was as if she knew him, as if she had been waiting for this moment, this exact moment, to make him stop. He slowed his car, the engine's hum suddenly too loud in the otherwise quiet street. The girl didn't flinch, didn't move. She stood there like she was expecting him. The streets around them remained unmoving, frozen, as if the city itself had paused to take notice. Vincent's fingers tightened on the steering wheel. Something about her, her stillness, made the air feel thick, heavy, and suddenly he couldn't breathe quite as easily as before. He rolled down the window, and the cool air rushed in, mingling with the smell of exhaust and the faint scent of fresh paint from a nearby store. "Hey there," Vincent called, trying to steady his voice. He wasn't used to feeling this off balance. "Are you all right?" The girl didn't move at first, but then she took a step closer, her shoes scuffing against the cracked pavement. Her eyes never left his, still fixed, still sure. "Yeah," she answered, her voice soft but clear, "I'm waiting for my mom." Vincent's stomach churned at the calmness of her response. There was something about the way she said it, like it was just another ordinary moment, yet everything in him screamed that it was anything but ordinary. He glanced around, half expecting someone to be watching from the shadows. "You live around here?" "Uh-huh," she replied, still staring at him. "I live with my mom. I can take you to her if you want." Vincent agreed. The little girl didn't hesitate, turning on her heel and walking toward the street ahead, her pace slow but sure. Vincent hesitated. Something told him he should just drive away, ignore the girl, forget what he'd seen, and continue with his day. But instead, his car idled for a moment longer than it should have. His hand, almost against his will, shifted into gear. As Vincent followed the girl through the narrow street, a strange familiarity began to creep up his spine. His thoughts flickered back to his childhood, to a memory that had long been buried. He could almost feel the warmth of his mother's hand, the soft hum of a lullaby as she tucked him in at night. But that memory wasn't just warmth, it was suffused with pain. A deep, unspoken pain. His fingers brushed against his elbow, the same spot where the mark rested. That birthmark, small but undeniable, had always been a part of him. It had been there for as long as he could remember, inherited from his mother, or so he had been told. A family trait, passed down through generations. But now, as he watched the little girl walk ahead of him, his hand lingering at his elbow, a new thought took hold. The mark wasn't just a family trait, it was a reminder. A reminder of a life he had left behind, a woman, a decision that had torn him apart. Grace was the little girl's name and also his late mother's name. He barely realized it at first, the name slipping into his mind like a whisper from the past. but then it hit him with a force that nearly stopped him in his tracks. Grace, his mother's name. Why had this girl been named that? Was it a coincidence? Or was it a cruel twist of fate? Vincent's heart began to pound, and his breath quickened as he tried to make sense of the strange connection between this girl and the mother he had lost. The girl's face was now burned into his memory, her small frame somehow echoing the woman who had once filled his life with so much love and so much grief. The name alone shouldn't have meant anything, but it did. It meant everything. Why would this girl have that name? Why now, after all these years? Vincent forced himself to take another step, to keep walking. He couldn't turn back. Not now. Vincent's footsteps echoed loudly on the pavement as he followed Grace deeper into the neighborhood. The further they walked, the more the world seemed to close in around him. The sound of distant conversations faded, replaced by the occasional hum of a streetlight or the shuffling of a paper bag in the wind. The scent of detergent mixed with something mustier, heavier. The air was thick, as if the streets were holding secrets that hadn't been spoken in years. Grace didn't look back. She led him forward, her small figure moving effortlessly through the dimming afternoon light. Every step he took felt heavier than the last, his mind spinning in a blur of thoughts. What was he doing? What was he hoping to find? The laundromat came into view, a small, worn building that looked like it had been here for decades. Its windows were streaked with grime, the sign faded from years of neglect. Grace paused at the door, turning to face him. "Here we are," she said, her voice unwavering. Vincent stood still for a moment, a tightness forming in his chest. The door creaked open, and he followed her inside. The air inside the laundromat was warm, suffused with the smell of detergent and bleach. The walls were lined with old machines, their hum punctuated by the occasional clink of coins. The space felt cramped, like it was trying to hold too many things at once. And then he saw her, standing behind the counter, folding clothes with quiet precision. Isabella. Time seemed to freeze in that moment. Vincent's pulse stuttered in his chest, and his stomach dropped as recognition hit him like a physical blow. He hadn't seen her in years. Not since everything had gone wrong. She looked the same, no, she looked better, almost untouched by time. Her dark hair was pulled back into a ponytail, her eyes still carrying the same warmth he remembered so clearly. And yet, as he stood there in the doorway, everything inside him screamed that this was no coincidence. She had been right there in front of him all along. Vincent's legs felt like lead, his mind racing, unable to catch up with the flood of emotion surging through him. The little girl, Grace, stood next to him, waiting patiently, as if this moment were nothing extraordinary. But for Vincent, it was everything. It was the moment he realized his past hadn't been buried after all. Vincent's gaze never left Isabella as he stood frozen at the entrance of the laundromat. His heart pounded, a rush of memories flooding his mind. The years of separation felt like an eternity, yet everything about her seemed just as he remembered. Time had not dulled the ache of their past. Isabella didn't speak at first. Her hands remained still, poised over a stack of freshly folded laundry. The sound of the machines humming in the background filled the space between them, a stark contrast to the silence that weighed down the room. Finally, Isabella exhaled, her voice barely above a whisper. "You shouldn't have come here, Vincent." Vincent's chest tightened. "I didn't know I had a choice." Her eyes flickered with something unreadable. "You've moved on, built your empire. I never wanted to drag you back into this." Into her. Vincent stepped forward, his eyes searching her face. Into who? His voice cracked with urgency, a question that had been gnawing at him since the moment he saw Grace. Isabella's gaze dropped to the floor, her hands trembling slightly as she folded another shirt. "Grace." She hesitated, her breath shallow. "I didn't tell you. I didn't think you'd want to know." Vincent's pulse raced as his mind scrambled for answers. "What are you talking about? She's my daughter, isn't she?" Isabella's eyes shot up, and there was a flicker of something deep in them, regret, fear, maybe even shame. "She is," she confessed, her voice strained. But you weren't ready. You were always too consumed by your ambition. I didn't want her to grow up with that rejection. So, I left. Alone. Vincent's world tilted on its axis. You left, he whispered, the hurt in his voice more cutting than he intended. You left me. Isabella nodded, her gaze breaking from his. You would have pushed us away. You were already slipping away before we even knew it. And I couldn't. I couldn't raise a child in that world. Not without a father who was truly present. Her words hit him like a storm, stirring emotions he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Ambition, control. He'd sacrificed everything for those things, even love. Even family. I thought I was doing the right thing. Isabella's voice broke, and she wiped a tear from her cheek. I didn't want to bother you. The silence that followed was suffocating. Vincent stood there, grappling with the weight of her confession. The years he had spent building his empire now felt hollow, the success he had achieved tainted by his own failure to see what really mattered. Is Grace really mine? Vincent finally asked, his voice barely audible. Isabella nodded, her eyes never leaving his. She's yours. All of her? And she's waited for you, for so long. Vincent's breath caught. His gaze shifted to Grace, who stood off to the side, watching him with wide eyes. A small flicker of hope in them, but it was quickly masked by an air of uncertainty. Grace's soft voice interrupted the tension hanging in the air. Why didn't you come sooner? She asked, her tone direct, a question filled with the innocence of a child who had been waiting for something she didn't understand. Vincent turned to face her, his heart aching. He could see the hurt in her eyes, the confusion that had likely been there for years. She didn't look like the child he had imagined, she was so much more. Her gaze was sharp, her presence commanding, and yet there was a vulnerability beneath it all. I didn't know about you, Grace, Vincent said softly, his voice cracking as the weight of his words sank in. I didn't know I had a daughter. Grace's eyes narrowed, and she took a step closer, her small feet making no sound on the old wooden floor. So, you just forgot about us? Vincent flinched at her question, the words cutting deeper than he expected. She was too young to understand the complexities of their past, yet she was asking questions that forced him to confront the choices he had made. I didn't forget, he whispered. I didn't know. I wasn't there when I should have been. Why didn't you want me? Grace interrupted, her blunt question hanging in the air like a heavy stone. Vincent's throat tightened. The question was raw, painful, and he didn't know how to answer it. How could he explain the fear, the ambition, the years he had spent chasing something that now seemed so empty? I wanted you, Vincent said, his voice low, almost a plea. I wasn't ready. I thought I had more time to figure it out. Grace tilted her head, her eyes studying him with an intensity that felt like she was trying to see right through him. But you didn't come. You stayed away. Vincent opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He couldn't tell her the truth, not now. Not like this. He watched as she crossed her arms, looking away from him, the hurt visible in her stance. It was the first time he saw the weight of abandonment in her eyes, the first time he understood just how much she had longed for something he had never given. I don't need you to explain. Grace's voice was quiet now, resigned. But I've been waiting for you. For years. Her words hung in the air, and Vincent felt a sharp pang in his chest. He could feel the enormity of his absence, the years of silence between them that could never be undone. The ache in his heart deepened, and for the first time in a long time, he understood what it meant to truly regret something. Vincent's mind was spinning. He had always been a man of action, of decision. But now, standing here in this laundromat with Isabella and Grace, he was frozen. His instinct was to run, to turn around and pretend none of this had ever happened. It would be easier, wouldn't it? He could retreat back into his world of spreadsheets and board meetings, where everything was calculated, predictable. But something in him. Something deep, refused to let him walk away this time. He looked at Grace, her eyes still studying him, waiting. Her small face seemed so fragile, so full of hope, despite the hurt she had already felt. And then there was Isabella, standing in the background, watching him with that same vulnerable expression, the one that held years of untold stories. His heart wavered, torn between two lives, the life he had built, with its cold precision, and the one that had been waiting for him all these years, the one that held a daughter who needed him. What should he do? The fear of failure, of rejection, gripped him. He wasn't ready for this. He had never been ready. But what was his life worth if he didn't take this chance? What was the point of all his success if he couldn't face the past and build something real out of it? He turned to Isabella, his voice steady despite the turmoil within him. I can't undo the past. I can't make it all right. But I'm here now, and I'm not leaving again. Isabella's eyes softened, but there was still a trace of doubt in her gaze. Are you sure? Vincent didn't answer at first. Instead, he looked at Grace, her face still filled with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. It was in that moment that he realized the real battle wasn't in the boardrooms or the business deals. The real battle was here, with his family. And it was a battle he was ready to fight. If you were Vincent, would you stay or run? Comment below. Vincent stood in the laundromat, the weight of the world crashing down on him. His chest tightened, and for the first time in years, he felt completely overwhelmed by emotion. His empire, his success, his carefully constructed life, all of it seemed meaningless in the face of the truth before him. A truth he had ignored for too long. He looked at Isabella, his past, standing just a few feet away. And then, his gaze shifted to Grace, his daughter, the girl he had never known. The pain of regret, guilt, and longing tore through him, but amidst the chaos, there was a singular clarity: he could not walk away again. He would never leave them. Vincent's hands trembled slightly as he reached up and untied his CEO tie. The familiar, suffocating fabric that had once symbolized his control now felt like a prison. He pulled it off, letting it fall to the ground in a silent declaration. It was the first real act of freedom he had taken in years, a symbol of his willingness to let go of the life he had built in order to embrace the family he had neglected. The phone in his pocket buzzed, but he ignored it. No more meetings. No more distractions. For the first time in his life, Vincent Porter chose something more important than business. He chose his family. I'm here, he whispered, his voice breaking as he looked at Grace. And I'm not leaving again. I will protect you both. Whatever it takes. Grace's eyes softened, and for the first time, Vincent saw a flicker of hope in them, a hope he had never seen in the years of distance between them. He stepped closer to her, kneeling down to her level. I promise, he said, his voice filled with the rawness of his emotions. I'll make it right. The decision to leave the corporate world behind wasn't easy. The boardroom, where Vincent had once been the king, now felt like a battleground. His sudden absence from meetings, his lack of response to the constant demands, sent ripples through his company. His assistant called him multiple times, but Vincent no longer cared. He had traded his suit for a father's responsibility. Rumors spread quickly. Media outlets were quick to pounce, their headlines screaming about the sudden downfall of the CEO who had been a business tycoon. Speculation ran wild. Had Vincent fallen out of touch with reality? Was he cracking under the pressure? The tabloids painted him as a man who had it all, only to walk away from it all without explanation. They didn't know the truth. He was chasing something far more valuable than any stock price. In his absence, the board members muttered about his mental state, his sudden disappearance from the public eye. They began making calls to each other, trying to gauge what was happening with their once celebrated CEO. There were talks of replacing him, of pulling the company back to its previous direction. It was an unstable time for the company, one that Vincent knew would come with consequences. But for once, he didn't care. Isabella remained skeptical. She watched Vincent closely, her gaze never fully trusting the changes in him. She had seen him rise to the top, only to crash and burn in the end. Her fears were valid. Could he really change? Or was this just another moment of self-deception, a fleeting decision he would regret when the dust settled? Grace, however, seemed to see something different in him. Though cautious, there was a flicker of optimism in her eyes that hadn't been there before. She didn't fully trust him yet, but she was willing to let him prove himself. She had spent years living without a father, without the man who should have been there for her, and now, as she watched him, she was still unsure of what this meant. Could he be the father she had always wanted? Or would he disappear again when things got tough? For Vincent, the road ahead was unclear. There was no manual for what he was doing, no formula for rebuilding a relationship with a daughter he had never known. But one thing was certain, he was committed to seeing it through, no matter how difficult it became. But even as Vincent made the choice to rebuild his life with Isabella and Grace, there were questions lingering, unanswered and unsettling. Could he truly change? Could he be the father Grace needed, or would his ambition pull him away once again? Vincent's thoughts often drifted back to the birthmark. Was it simply a coincidence? A mark that connected him to his past, or was it something more, something deeper, a symbol of a life he hadn't fully understood? There was still so much about himself, about his family, that he didn't know. The questions gnawed at him late at night, when Isabella was asleep and Grace was in her room, her mind likely still processing everything that had happened. And then there was the lingering doubt about Isabella. Her skepticism about his commitment was valid, but there was something else in her eyes, something darker. What had she been hiding all these years? What other secrets were buried beneath the surface of their fractured relationship? Was it really possible to rebuild what had been broken, or were they all doomed to repeat the past? Vincent knew that, for now, they were in fragile territory. He had made a promise to Grace, but there were forces at play, both within and outside his control. That could threaten everything he was trying to build. And yet, for the first time in a long time, Vincent felt the faintest glimmer of hope. It wasn't his wealth, his empire, or his status that mattered anymore. It was his family. And now, he has to rebuild not just his relationships, but himself. If this story gripped you, subscribe and turn on notification for more emotional stories like this.